Hi, welcome to my JavaScript Kotlin tutorial, Lesson 5. Today we're going to talk about JavaScript interoperability. JavaScript interoperability is really important. It's one of the things that should be at top of your list when considering whether to use a compile to JavaScript language like Kotlin. I've worked with other compile to JavaScript languages such as Elm and GWT, which compiles Java to JavaScript. And to be honest, in those cases, interoperability with JavaScript was a big pain in the butt. It was so much of a pain in the butt that it arguably could be a deal breaker. So let me tell you why this is important. For one, you want to be able to take advantage of all the huge ecosystem of libraries that's out there for JavaScript. So you want to be able to call JavaScript libraries that are already written from your Kotlin code, or maybe JavaScript code that you've already written from your Kotlin code. Secondly, I do a lot of work where I develop libraries and components and tools for others to consume. And sometimes those others may not be using Kotlin. So I want them to be able to call my stuff that I write in Kotlin from JavaScript. And I'd like them to do so without really even knowing about Kotlin. So we want interoperability in both directions. We want to be able to call JavaScript functions from Kotlin, and we want to be able to have JavaScript programmers consume code that we write in Kotlin. So let's get started. Okay, I've still got the project that we were working on last time we left off. So we have an index.html file, and we have a Kotlin file. So before we can consume some JavaScript, we have to have some JavaScript. So again, our goal is to have some JavaScript functions written in JavaScript, and we want to be able to call those functions from Kotlin. So let's go to our HTML file, and let's create some JavaScript that we can access from Kotlin. So I'm going to make a script tag here. Oops. And we'll start out simple. We'll make a top-level variable called window.x equals 10. So in case you're not familiar, that's equivalent to saying var x equals 10. So when you declare a top-level variable from the global space like this, you're really just adding a new property to the global window object is what you're doing. So, okay, now that we have that variable, that's the simplest possible JavaScript thing we could do. Let's see if we can access it from our Kotlin code. And one more thing, just because window is the global space, maybe we want to give a slightly longer name, so we'll call it XYZ. All right, let's go see if we can access that top-level variable from our Kotlin code. So let's go over to our Kotlin. Let's see, I think I'm going to, I'll leave this stuff in here. Let's just scooch it down a bit. Okay, so step one, we need to declare a variable to hold that XYZ. So recall we have our window.xyz. So we'll say val xyz equals. Now, here's the thing that's interesting. We're going to give this a type of dynamic. That's a new type that JavaScript or the Kotlin has created specifically for this purpose. If you make something dynamic, that means all rules are off. You can call any method on it, access any property on it. You're basically shutting down all the awesomeness of the compiler. So you don't want to always use this. I'll show you some more type-safe, Kotlin-friendly ways to do it, but this is the quickest, easiest way to get started, is using this type called dynamic. The second thing is, if you want to be able to insert some JavaScript in your code, you can use this function called JS. So what goes inside of there is a string constant. It's got to be a string literal, or a string constant, and you can just put JavaScript code in there. So I'm going to say window.xyz. And whatever that expression returns, so this could be any valid JavaScript expression. And whatever that expression returns is going to be stuck into this variable right here. So let's see what happens. All right, so I'll compile this. And I'll go to my HTML file, and I'll say open in browser. And let's open up our console. And there it is, XYZ10. So we have successfully accessed a JavaScript variable from Kotlin. So as you can see, there's two things you need to know there. One, there's this magic.js function that takes a string, and in that string can be any JavaScript code you'd like. And whatever, if that's an expression and it returns something, then it will be put into that variable. Secondly, by declaring your variable of type dynamic, you're essentially turning off all of the type checking of Kotlin. Let's do something a little bit more complex. Let's go over here and say window.user equals, and we'll make a more complex guy. So we'll say first name equals Dave, handsome equals true. Okay, so now we have another global variable in the window object called user. So let's access that guy. Now notice I'm not getting any help from the compiler here. If I say F, I don't get any auto-completion. That's because we're using a dynamic type, and I can put anything I want here and it'll compile. So this should print out Dave, user.firstname. Okay, so I'll do a build, and we'll go back to our browser and hit refresh. And voila, it prints out Dave. All right, probably more common than accessing variables would be accessing functions that are defined in JavaScript. So let's define a function. I'm going to say function. We'll call this my function. And we'll print my function. Got my semicolon over here. I think I'll add that. By the way, this just makes a global function in the global space. It's not that different from just doing something like this. So these two things are pretty much equivalent. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll leave it like this, just so we kind of have some symmetry in our examples. So we have a global function defined, and let's see if we can call that function from our JavaScript code. Believe it or not, we don't have to do anything different than what we already know. So I'm going to create a dynamic object, and I'll call this my function. And then I'll simply access my function variable like so. It's a variable of type function. So this is a variable of type function. And now we'll just invoke it. And we'll invoke it with the parentheses like so. So that should put on our command line my function. So let's do a build. And let's go back to our browser and hit refresh. And if it works, we should see the word my function down here. And it worked. Cool. All right. So we now know how to call JavaScript from Kotlin. In our next episode, I will show you a couple other things coming up. One, I'm going to show you how to call Kotlin from JavaScript. Two, I'm going to show you how to call JavaScript from Kotlin like we just did, but in a more type-safe, Kotlin-friendly way. All right, for now, signing off.